Welcome and thank you for joining us today for TLS 1.3's 4th anniversary. What have we learned about implementation and network monitoring? My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Chris Steffen, Research Director covering Security and Risk Management at EMA. Chris brings over 20 years of industry experience to EMA, focusing on IT management leadership, cloud security, and regulatory compliance. He holds several technical certifications, including Certified Information Systems Security Professional and Certified Information System Auditor, and was awarded the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award 5 times for virtualization and cloud and data center management. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Chris. Take it away.
Thanks, Raleigh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on who you are and where you are listening from. I am Chris Steffen. Look forward to taking and sharing some of this information from this great research study that I did on TLS 1.3. As many of you may know, it's a standard that's been out for a bit, and even when it was released, we were trying to understand what the impacts on the community were going to be. And 4 years later, we finally have some pretty good understanding of not only those that have implemented the quote unquote new TLS, but also those who have continually decided not to. And so in this quick webinar, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the security trends, those that implemented it, those that did not implement it, and some conclusions that I took from the research that might be interesting to take back to your teams and worth mentioning to your leadership. Before we get started, I very much wanted to thank Cisco and F5. Both are sponsors of this research study. You can go to their websites and find the report. We'll also share a link to this report at the end of this webinar. Both of them have great TLS solutions and great TLS stories that are very much worth looking into. So that's my shameless plug for them. But at the same time, this research is very independent. They were just gracious enough to sponsor it and to make certain that the world gets to see the importance of TLS. So as an introduction, I already kind of talked a little bit about, what the overall world looks like according to TLS. There was a lot of trepidation about, whether TLS was going to be an accepted standard, something that people were going to be able to use. And we'll go into some of the specifics as we move on through the webinar here. Obviously, people like to understand who we talk to, why we talk to, so on and so forth. And so this slide is extraordinarily difficult to read. I know that it is. Feel free to download this presentation or maximize your size. This slide basically talks about a little bit about our demographics. The first part is which of the roles are you claiming that you have, from an executive role to a practitioner role? And then I really wanted to talk a little bit about what industries that we polled that were using or not using TLS. And again, a very large cross section of different industries, different verticals out there. 208 respondents total. We actually received right around 700 total responses. We dismissed, again, just short of 500 of those for veracity of the data. EMA is hyper vigilant about making certain the data that we're getting is relevant and worthy of being included. So we exclude a lot of the bots, as you might imagine, that are out there. We make certain that people actually understand what TLS is, and for that matter, can actually spell TLS. So again, the data is something that we stand by, and happy to present that data to you. So the first section that I wanted to talk about is some of the security trends that we found. And the first one was actually was actually kind of really interesting when it was all said and done, is what was your organization's primary motivating factor? Took a lot of different paths, from the corporate mandates to improved network security. Most organizations that implemented TLS looked as another improvement update for their network security. Only about 10% of those surveyed implemented it due to a vendor or regulatory pressures. Ironically, the greatest benefit, enhanced data privacy, was only a motivation for about 11.5% of those polled. Everybody has their own motivation, and it really did speak to some of the drivers and some of the continued drivers for people implementing or looking at TLS as a possibility in their organization. Secondly, I wanted to talk a little bit about how concerned your organization was that TLS would, basically cause significant disruption. In this particular survey, only 11% basically said they weren't concerned. Not any kind of surprise at all. Everybody else, almost 90% basically said yes, they had some concerns, with 16.5% basically saying that it was a huge concern. Um, and again, not surprising there. When you look, and we'll get through this in the survey, when you look at this, the biggest concern about being visibility and having to change security controls was something, obviously something of particular relevance to those implementing TLS. In many cases, implementing TLS rendered existing security solutions or existing controls less effective at addressing, visibility monitoring solutions that were already in house. So again, those concerns were well warranted, and some of them still haven't been addressed, which is again something we'll talk about as we go on in the survey. Lastly, in the security trend space, which is the best to describe your team's view of network encryption? I found this particularly interesting, right? When you look at network encryption improves the security posture of our organization at 41%, all the way down to the last one there, where we are aware of the trade-offs, but there are business requirements that require it. Um, Organizations have very different views of network security and data security when it's all said and done. 73% in this particular instance believe that TLS improved their security or privacy for their organization's communications, but they also understand that 20% realize that network encryption can also lead to increase in malicious activity in their networks, since their tools may not be able to effectively deal with it. 8% implemented network encryption anyway, citing the business requirements, as I mentioned above. So again, the trade-offs are there. They understand those trade-offs. They understand the risk involved, but they did see that implementing TLS presented risk into their environment that they may or may not have necessarily been prepared to deal with or recognize. So to kind of get into this, I wanted to start with the organizations that implemented TLS, and this was a bulk of the responses because I was, again, particularly interested in what they had to say. Um, did enabling TLS in your organization um, require some significant changes to your architecture? And the answer was emphatically yes, right? Almost, again, almost 85, 90% said yes in some way, shape, or form. From an architecture perspective, significant, minor, whatever have you, changes had to be made. And those changes, are either organic from organizations that were constantly looking to update their network infrastructure, to putting on the brakes and making changes due to the TLS update. Again, 87% basically indicated that they had to make some kind of change. So as we see that network and security are becoming more and more intertwined, we see that both are impacting each other's budgets. And this is a case where your security team might have dramatically impact your network team's budget because they needed to update their infrastructure and their equipment to take and deal with the TLS update. Next year, what are the benefits your organization has realized by looking at TLS? Data security was an obvious one, right? I think it goes without saying that data security, data privacy was one of the core reasons of taking and implementing TLS to begin with. A better user experience I thought was very interesting as well. Decreased latency was very minor, but again, as data security, data privacy become more of an issue for corporate America, become more headlines, become more regulated, so on and so forth, it's no question that it became a priority for more organizations to implement a set of controls based on TLS, to augment or improve their data security, their data privacy. I also wanted to get a kind of a sense of with working from remotely and working from home, how was TLS being used, and got some of these results. Is business traffic, being used for is business traffic being used for TLS? And the answer is yes. About 76%, about three quarters. And do you require your vendors to take and use TLS? And about 64% said yes there. Again, no particular surprise there. Working remote is here to stay, and companies are still catching up how to best deal with those workers and how they handle sensitive information and intellectual property. One of those many solutions is TLS for all workers, right? At the same time, regulatory bodies for the financial services and healthcare organizations have mandated implementation of stricter data security controls, and TLS is generally one of those requirements that you're seeing in those verticals. Vendors doing business with customers in those verticals are often expected to access sensitive information over connections that are using the latest version of TLS, which is obviously 1.3. So again, no real surprise here. I am happy to see that not only is it an internal requirement, but they're actually passing down this requirement to a lot of their third party contracts as well. The whole idea of pass down compliance is honestly some of the ways that we tend to make the world go around in compliance. And again, this is a real advantage of that solution when it's all said and done, is passing down TLS so that your other organizations are using it as well. Lastly here, I wanted to take and talk a little bit about, kind of a catch up on, what some of these other points might be. Has your organization experienced any significant incidents because of TLS? The answer was overwhelmingly no, but ironically, that's not where the prime point here. The prime point is that 26% said the answer is likely yes. That because they implemented TLS, they were probably going to miss an incident that they would have caught with their tools otherwise. Um, then, the second point here, at any point, did you have to roll back your implementation of TLS because of visibility? And it was about half. About half of the customers that implemented TLS ended up having to roll back at one point or another because the tools that they had or the tools available to them were unable to take in and give them the visibility that their risk managers required, that their security teams required. And it was just one of those things where um, all of a sudden they were blind and needed to be able to see better into their environment. And so they had to roll back, they had to figure out how to establish that visibility again, and then we're able to implement another time. And then lastly, did enable TLS 1.3 on your enterprise networks have a negative impact on user experience? The answer is overwhelmingly no. But again, I can only understand that in this particular case, about 30% said yes, and that's because of user error, lack of user education, trying to understand the benefits of TLS, educating their users about the benefits of TLS. A lot of different parts that come into it. So again, it didn't implementing any of these organizations that implemented TLS. It didn't come without pitfalls. There's a lot of different parts of it that those organizations needed to look at and needed to evaluate and understand if it was right for their organization. And as indicated here, some of them even went back and had to stop and go back again. So again, pretty interesting results when it was all said and done. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the organizations that did not choose to implement TLS for whatever reason. To start with, how would you rate your company's security concerns? Again, not really any kind of surprise here, but 100% said they had concerns, right? If they had no concerns, in theory, they would have implemented TLS. But it really is interesting when you see, how it kind of broken out. About half of them were just, baseline concern, with about 15% saying they had extreme concerns, and would probably never likely implement TLS. But this really speaks to where that organization might be as far as their risk is concerned, and understanding how TLS impacts their risk, how it impacts their visibility, and how it impacts their overall security. But they have basically made a decision that at this time that they aren't going to implement TLS, but they will likely wait for technological advances to alleviate some of their concerns around visibility and monitoring and security in general. Secondly, kind of a hodgepodge here, has the adoption of TLS by most technology vendors impacted your plans to not adopt TLS? Um, in this survey, 60% said no. Uh, Anecdotally, I have talked to plenty, and this just isn't the case. As we saw before, so many organizations that have taken and adopt TLS have required the vendors that they're dealing with to adopt TLS as well. So I think this number is a little skewed to the negative because again, people were, you know, adamant about not adopting TLS. Eventually, I think they're going to once their infrastructure improves enough for them to be able to do so. But again, if they weren't forced to do so throughout another organization or what have you, I think they would choose not to. Does TLS 1.3 create a operational security issue? I was really kind of happy to see that there was a lot of people that saw it both as an organization and security issue. About a third said that. Obviously, a lot of people saw it as a security issue. Surprisingly, 11% saw it as an operational issue. But it really does kind of speak to security operations and business operations just in general, just how disruptive TLS can be within an organization, and then how you deal with that that business disruption based on privacy, based on risk, based on compliance related controls. Again, we do this every day. Security is the worst enemy sometimes of business operations. I know that we always are constantly talking about that and trying to change that mindset. But this is one of those cases where, because of the nature of implementing TLS, it did end up taking and having a pretty dramatic impact on how people did some work. So I can see very easily why it might be an operational issue as well. And then how concerned are you that TLS may break existing controls? Again, 100% had some level of concern. Again, no real surprise there. Trying to understand how to deal with those security controls and how to either find compensating controls to deal with lack of implementation, or finding exceptions for organizations that require TLS is really around how this was answered. And it's again, to this day, everybody that answered in a negatively here, as far as concerned, or as far as implementation is concerned, they are likely having to find a compensating control or a methodology of explaining to the vendor or regulator that they're dealing with why they are not implementing TLS at this time and what controls that they have to mitigate that concern. So again, not a problem that's going away. This is a problem facing every organization of every size when it comes to TLS, whether they're implementing it or not implementing it, and those not implementing it are going to have to justify why and have some level of compensating controls as to how to deal with it accordingly. Uh, this one right here, the lack of security, talent, and resources impact your decision to not implement TLS. Kind of a 50-50 split here. The answer was yes and no. You can look at it from the no standpoint, being that our network teams and our security teams already have a handle on what this is going to look like. But the reality of it is the more jarring figure is that yes, it did, because they don't have the security bandwidth, the security resources to add yet another pretty significant project when it's all said and done to the list of things that the security team is already dealing with. We already have all heard about, how oversubscribed, security teams are, how the lack of talent is out there. I'm not going to beat that dead horse. But again, when I'm talking about TLS specifically, when you start taking and talking about the mitigating factors as to why you didn't implement TLS, that security talent, fact keeps on popping up no matter what survey that we're doing. And again, worth mentioning here as well as a factor in what was going on. This is the last real graph that I have, and I know it's very noisy, and I kind of wanted to walk through it. What is the primary reason, or the biggest reason? Again, lack of that you didn't implement TLS. No surprise here. Monitoring being the top one. The lack of visibility and security and troubleshooting being, the second. Implementation cost being another very high one. you're welcome to look through all of this. Um, it is important to understand, and the reason that I included this graph specifically is that when you are talking with your security leadership and your business leadership, these are the concerns that they're having as well, and it's important to show them that they're not alone, right? That you're either waiting for technological advances that help you advance some of these problems, or that you can come up with mitigating factors as to why implementing TLS in your organization at this time may not make the most sense. I think it's important to really understand that you aren't alone when it's all said and done on not implementing TLS, but that there are solutions and there are other reasons that people might be considering it as well. And so sharing that information up your business chain, your line of business, probably is very helpful in justification as to why are you either accepting that risk, or why is it worth taking a looking for a compensating control. So I know that was a lot of information. I wanted to share three real quick conclusions, and they're the three that really kind of stood out the most when doing this report, that I thought worth sharing. And again, we're sharing, up your food chain. One is visibility and monitoring considerations remain the biggest obstacle to adoption. No surprise there. Even with vendor controls and regulatory requirements, many organizations have delayed implementing TLS 1.3 for the significant upheaval that it would cause their security and monitoring plans within their environment. Again, no surprise. Even with improved technology since the first announcement of TLS 1.3, organizations still can't overcome these challenges, and organizations are evaluating risk and compensating controls when it comes to delaying the implementation, and continue to evaluating stopgap, compensating controls that are easier and less intrusive to implement and maintain than TLS. While the roadmap to their eventual TLS migration still remains open, while those compensating controls remain in effect. This is going to continue being a case, and it's going to get easier over time as you adopt new technologies that improve those visibility and monitoring capabilities. Implementing TLS will become easier for the organization, but in a lot of organizations, it's going to be a wait and see sort of things, as they don't have the time or energy to invest in kind of throwing their security organization in upheaval for the TLS implementation. The second one is resource implementation costs are significant. As I mentioned before, people are taking and continuing upgrading their environment. And that's one way that they're going to eventually end up taking and implementing TLS. 87% that have implemented TLS 1.3 require some level of infrastructure changes to accommodate the update. As organizations update their network infrastructure and security tools to TLS becomes more realistic, but it's a difficult pill to swallow for many organizations to revamp their network topology due to this kind of update. Over time, I believe that organizations will adopt TLS 1.3 for no other reason than existing technologies will be depreciated. But that continues to be a slow process. There are also real considerations about the human resources available to implement a project with very little perceived business value, 81%, and causing workload increases to thinly stretched security staff, as we discussed before. Again, this is going to change over time as the technology improves, but the competing business needs should and will likely take a higher priority over implementing TLS. Lastly, remote work, regulatory, and vendor controls and improved data security are the drivers to implement TLS. With all the attention paid to data security and privacy standards over the past few years, it's little wonder that improved data security and privacy were the primary drivers for implementation, and those goals were generally achieved with TLS 1.3. The push for remote working has also increased adoption of TLS 1.3 because security teams are looking for better ways for remote workers and third-party vendors to access their sensitive data. Again, that's going to continue. That's something that I think we can all agree that working remote is not going anywhere. It's something that we're going to continue to see some iterations of, so on and so forth. But what's never going to change is the data security and data privacy concern with those employees connecting into their corporate environments. And how do you take and secure that data? TLS is one of those ways. I think it's really important. And we could talk data security all day. We're not going to. But when you look at it when it's all said and done, that will be another primary push for organizations looking to implement TLS. With that, I appreciate your time today. You can find the report here at this link. Of course, I recommend that you read the report. There's obviously more data included in the report. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Chris Steffen. I'm out there. I'm a managing research director at EMA. I have a gazillion connections. I'm always happy to chat with people via LinkedIn, and feel free to hit me up with additional questions. With that, that's about all I had, and I appreciate you attending this webinar and look forward to hearing more from you if you have questions. Thank you.